So, welcome, and I like to start off with a first question here. I think a lot of us are thinking about the academic year starting up, thinking about how we're going to introduce our students to ourselves and our topics and our courses and our all the procedures of our classes, but also just personally, how do we introduce students to each other, which really comes down to what are we planning for the first day of school. So I think in years gone by, this is a pretty standard question. We probably have like a standard thing that we pull out of the closet and we do every year on the first day. So what are some ideas that people have for the very first thing you do with your students, be it at the university level or the high school level?
For me, one of the things that's going to be very important is to get them used to, didn't have to do this before, but get them very familiar with the computer software right away. Used to be able to work that in over days of time, over the first week. Now it's going to be very important that they know what they're doing with the software the first day.
When you say software, do you mean like your LMS or
LMS,
something more specific?
Zoom, LMS, perhaps even Google, because we're planning on doing things like the labs on Google Docs, and then having them share it with me instead of having to go through the LMS routine of make it a PDF, stick it in, submit it, and then an hour later I get it, or however long it takes, depending on how many people are submitting over the entire college. Just doing it as a Google Doc, the group can work on it together, sharing it with me, then I have access to it right away. And then when I'm done grading it, they still have access to it. They can see the grading I've done on it. Seems more efficient, but they have to know how to use Google Docs and they have to know how to share.
So that kind of brings up an interesting question, which is, for any of you, have there been any big shifts in, say, the LMS that you were using in the spring to what you'll be starting the year off in the fall? Meaning you were kind of forced into things in the spring, maybe, and then now your school, your university has a time to rethink the system. Have there been any big changes in LMSs that you're going to have to educate your students on?
Not so much the LMS, but I'm really looking forward to, my school system was not allowed to use Zoom last spring. And we got the approval the last week of school. Oh, okay, now you can use Zoom. Well, I'm not changing now. So I'm looking forward to the ability to put kids in smaller groups so that they can actually discuss questions instead of just all thinking individually and then trying to do the whole class.
Yeah, that'll be, I think, a big difference. Aside from video technology and LMSs, are there any other online systems that you think you're going to have to provide like explicit instruction to your students on the first day? For example,
very quick use.
Oh, go ahead.
Very quick use of simulations and various sorts of non-hands-on experiments. Also, presentation style. When last year it was, okay, put up the PowerPoint slide of maybe 5 or 6 and then walk around the class and see who's got what comments about it and then progress the talk through. That opportunity doesn't exist. And last semester, the students still knew about it. The students had enough confidence from the first part of the semester to unmute their microphone and say what they wanted to say. I've heard from talking to other professors who use Zoom regularly that in the beginning of the semester, it's more difficult to draw the students into actually contributing unless you can be a little bit clever about it. I don't know what will work, but I know just asking the students a question and saying, talk to the guy next to you, or talk to the woman next to you, or just yell across the room if you should wish to do so, to find out what everybody says about it, is not quite the same as a Zoom poll.
Yeah.
And how to use
actually
it.
had the opposite experience in a course I taught this summer, where it was we ended up breaking the class up for discussions because it was too difficult for people to speak up in a large group. So we ended up splitting things out into smaller groups. Fortunately, we had 3 people that could moderate breakout rooms in Zoom to do discussion. So we were able to bring it down a small number of people so they could actually have a discussion and everybody could get a turn to speak.
I'd have to say, in contrast, at the high school level, I've got to be exceedingly concerned with the social emotional well-being of my students. They had a rough end of this summer or a semester last year. They've had a very restrictive summer. So that's really where I'm going to be focusing, essentially certainly the first couple of days, outside of using, the Google Classroom tools. Sorry about the plane. Other than using the Google Classroom tools that they're familiar with.
Yeah, I think that brings up an interesting point, which is, and this is something I've been thinking about myself, is it seems like, as we start the year off, we have kind of the go over the syllabus approach, we have the go over the technology approach, or we also, I think, have the equally valid approach, which is let's not do anything about the subject, let's just build a community. And let's talk about and make sure that everybody knows how to work together, that they see each other, that they have that interaction between students that is completely outside of the things that we teach. So as you try to worry about, just going with what Roy was saying, how are you planning on doing that to connect kids and to worry about their kind of emotional state and make sure that they're starting the year off in a good place?
Well, that's what I'm here for, isn't it?
Fair answer.
Well, I think we have an advantage in high school is that the kids will come in already knowing one another, which is a lot different than a college class where God knows who you've got in there. They're just all kind of like, maybe they're all freshmen, who knows? I teach physics to all the juniors at my school, so they're going to know people in the class. That's not the issue. And they likely know me pretty well too. So, yeah.
4,600 students at my school.
Yeah, well, I've got 850, so there's only 100 sophomores, 100 juniors, so it's a little different. Yeah.
4,000,
I have
almost
a similarly
5,000
large
students.
high school.
It's a big high school.
Wow, that's a big high school, I'll be honest.
It is, but it's still only 32 students per class.
Yeah.
So all my colleagues are all, oh, it's such a big school. And it's like, I see the exact same number of students they see.
Sure.
But I went to a much smaller high school growing up, and my students have a much different experience because, like one of the other people was saying, I knew everybody in my grade by freshman year of high school already. We only had one middle school, so everybody just moved. these kids, they come in and they might know 2 kids in my class. They've only seen 2 of them before. So it's different to try to be like, okay, who are you? And who are each other? How are you going to make your study groups? Normally my kids bond together over their assigned tables. I actually assigned them the first day. And they're not going to have that, oh, I've sat next to you, I learned who you were. And I don't know how to facilitate that in the class.
Kathy, if you don't mind my asking, how do you typically go about assigning your students? Is it random? Is it kind of the, I forget the actual terminology of it, but the transparent directed grouping, or?
So what I do is actually the very first day of class, because of the way our school is, I don't have enough time to assign seats. So the first day, all we do is they fill out an index card that's like, what's your name? What math prep do you have? Basic things. And then one of the things is, what do I need to know when assigning your seat? And I give them examples. Can you not stand a certain other person you just discovered is in this period? Do you have to be in the front of the room? Like, I do not want any fights starting over seats. And then I take those index cards and I start randomized, and then I cherry pick and move people around. I have tables of 4. I make sure that the females are in tables of 3 or more girls. And that's mostly what I do. And then as I get to know them over the year, I'll start to more make sure that my weakest student has somebody who I've learned is good at explaining near them. Yeah.
I'm concerned about the students too. I'm in a small school that we have maybe 175 a grade. I teach sophomores. Most of the students have met each other, learned each other last year. And the problem I run into is because they know each other, some kids are already quieted down because they've been bullied by others. And I don't mean bully in the physical sense, but so-and-so calls out the answers. They're always right. I don't have to. So-and-so is sometimes rude to people and just sort of baiting them. Another group has learned to be quiet and simply answer the questions and not sort of venture out, not grow by venturing an answer. And so I am interested in this classroom community issue where we're getting different voices coming in and not bringing in the traditional voices and sort of getting that, what we did last year, we're going to do this year, behavior from the kids, the safe behavior. I don't think we get I did notice that when we went to distance learning, an entirely different group of kids became the discussion leaders. And that the performers were shut down because they didn't have the feedback. And the non-performers, some of the kids who were always good but quiet, were suddenly venturing ideas and doing some original thinking. And I'd like to capture that right at the beginning this year. So again, I'm here for suggestions, not.
Yeah. To help facilitate that kind of community building, are any of you adding in, online code of conducts to your syllabus that kind of specifically outline how you want interactions to occur in an online space?
That's being more driven at the district level for me. Obviously, it's now part of the student code of conduct, and I will of course emphasize that as well as student community. But it's again, it's kind of more driven at the district level than at the classroom level.
I'm hoping to make it work where there's some sort of assignment they have to have done by 9 o'clock the night before that would prep them for any kind of discussion. And second one is that they can't turn off their monitors and they can't mute themselves. They have to be part of the whole thing. But I'm also thinking that I would limit discussions and limit that sort of in-person thing to maybe 30 minutes at a time. to make it a fairly pointed, you know, this is our chance to do this. And force behavior into a productive mode rather than the random mode.
Yeah. I see Austin put in the chat about if anyone has an example of a syllabus statement for online conduct that they would be willing to share. I think that would be great. And we can look to see, I think there's probably a lot of out there, but I also think there's probably value in I think this could be a good community building activity, is to actually have the class define what that conduct is for themselves. I mean, I think that our students now, for the most part, right, have experienced online learning. They're not complete novices in this realm. They know how to interact. They know what they should be doing. And it might be an interesting practice to use that as an introductory activity to say, how can we as a group define our code of conduct and then hold each other to it.
You know, I have a comment. Like when I've had students working in groups, inevitably someone ends up complaining to me in private that they were being treated poorly by someone else in the group. Sure. I'm teaching right now in the summer with Zoom. That hasn't happened at all. So, you know, I think part of it is partly that a lot of the people are overseas right now, and sometimes they're not really connected, but it looks like they're connected. But I haven't had a single complaint about any of the breakout sessions. And I always do in person. And so it might actually not be that much of a problem.
Yeah, I agree. It might not be. I think it like I said, I think as we gained in experience as instructors in the spring, so did our students gain in how to be students online. And I think they learned what may have gone well and what may not have. I see Mike may have a comment, or if he just raised his hand. Okay. Just out of curiosity, and this is once again something that I've been thinking about personally, has anyone thought about using tools like Slack or Discord to break up students into smaller groups or build that community in an asynchronous way? Because some of the high school teachers at least, still might be doing asynchronous type activities.
I've been looking at something that was, what was it called? Thinking about Slack, but also, I think it was called Ambi. There was someone at the AAPT meeting, or it might have been the pickup meeting, I forget which, but it's something that's for business, but currently free for use with anybody that's got a .edu. And it's very much like Slack, except it doesn't, it doesn't seem to be quite as in-depth. It's more group-oriented than topic-oriented. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm still playing with it to see if it's even worth looking at. But it might be a way to have students communicate with each other effectively when there's nobody there, when I'm not there. Or something like Slack.
So I've used Slack in a variety of situations, and it can work really well. We had one semester, one of my students formed it for, I teach a lab class with 24 people at most, and I gathered they didn't use it at all. They all wanted to use Facebook Messenger. That seems to be their preferred. So I'm just saying, you know, in the board of directors, we all use Slack, but it isn't necessarily comfortable for everybody for reasons I don't understand.
I think one reason I understand is because it's very different from most other systems. It looks different, it acts different. So I think students just see it as unusual. And they know how to use Facebook. Something like anything that works like Facebook or works like a discussion page, they'd be familiar with. Slack, just when I first started using it, did not strike me as a discussion page.
Mhm.
It took a while to get comfortable with it. Probably about a month.
Yeah, I'm for the first time, I'm in a group that's using Discord to work together, and that has been an interesting experience. It is definitely, you know, whereas Slack is neat and polished and definitely made to be appealing to businesses, Discord is definitely made to be appealing to kids. Not that it diminishes the ability to exchange information, but it's a little bit more gamified. It's a little bit more icon-y, and it's interesting. You can also connect. It is a voice system too, so you can actually have students talk to each other, not just write, which is a difference from Slack.
And for clarification, Slack and Discord are both collaborative platforms, or?
Yes. So the main idea behind both of them is that they're similar to like text messaging, where people can send both short and long messages to each other. You can attach files, you can attach videos, things like that. But you have the ability to group things in topically. So you can make a topical group where everything that occurs in all the chat in that group should be about that topic. It's also might be a way of doing student groups where you could put, group 1, group 2, group 3, and then all the interactions that occur inside those groups could be seen just inside the group Slack channels, or it's called a Slack channel or a Discord server. Don't know why the difference, but that's how they're named. It's really, it's an attempt to have very topically linked communication rather than kind of a continuous stream of things coming at you. It's a way of sorting, I guess. Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
Right.
I found that a lot of my students, whether I want them to or not, just choose to use FaceTime.
Yeah, that could be. Yep. So looking at some of the other questions.
In terms of, I'm sorry, in terms of this communication and the interaction with the students, how much effort do you put into monitoring that communication? And does that drive the choices that some of the students make?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Things like Slack or Discord will inevitably lead to unmonitored communication between students. You might be able to eventually uncover it, but it would be at a pace. The information flow would be in parallel, and there's no way that you could monitor all the parallel things simultaneously. So I think that is.
I'm also thinking in terms of offering credit for participation and interaction as well. So again, how much of that you want to monitor to say, all right, well, do it through this channel so that I can see that you're communicating and where you're getting stuck and that sort of thing. How much of that drives decisions in terms of what to use?
I think you very well could monitor participation that way. In fact, you can even, in both of these things, you can search by name, and say like, all right, by individual student, you could type in the student's name or their handle and just boom, get everything that person's ever said. And you could track it fairly efficiently in that sense. So looking at some of the other questions.
I'm curious. Sorry, I'm curious about. We're going to have the official discussion part, but then there's always like 3 other channels going on, like FaceTime or texting or whatever, especially if the kids know each other. So any ideas about, talk about having loop focus. I think that's my biggest concern is I have the synchronous time and then I have asynchronous time. And obviously I'm not in charge of the asynchronous part, but the synchronous part, I'm more concerned about like students maintaining focus on what they're doing And I think mine are like 80-minute blocks of time every other day is how we're setting it up. So just something to throw out there.
Well, this might lead into, oh, go ahead. I keep jumping
I
in,
was
but
just
it's
going to
better for
say,
you to talk.
I tend to actually talk to my students about that on those first couple days of school, even without synchronous or asynchronous, even when they're in my classroom. I talk to them about you need to have, the studies that show that your brain can't in fact multitask, that in fact you're just switching between topics, and you could be really, really efficient at switching between topics, but it's not actually going to, and I then go ahead and I give them the counterexamples. I say there are tasks that I do while listening to music, and that means I am switching tasks, and I know that. And I then say, and here's why, and here's how I balance it. But the moment I hit something I need to focus on, mute on the music, and there I go. And so I just give them examples, and then I explain to them also that they're going to learn very quickly in my class. This topic is hard enough. It needs your full attention. I need your full brain. And I think I reinforce that also with making sure that I give them reinforcement on that idea of I need their whole brain. So for example, that actually really informed my late policy. I tell them I would rather you have a full night's of sleep if something goes wacky, right? Something goes wonky when you go home. I always allow them on every assignment, they are always allowed to ask for at least a 1-day extension. And they will be granted it. They can give the worst excuse in the world. And I tell them that you can get that because I value you being here. And then, and that reinforces to them, it's that important for you to have your brain fully functioning and fully focused. That's easier to do when they're in the classroom. I do wonder how that's going to work the first couple of days, and especially with the virtual learning, because I get more control of them in the classroom to reinforce that. And once they see it works, I've had students have that aha moment of, oh my goodness, I can do so much better when I focus. I guess I should start doing that. So.
It brings to mind a concern that I had been thinking about several weeks ago, but had for some reason stopped thinking much about in class, such that when they're spending a certain amount of time in school, period. Students told me end of last semester, it was much easier to organize time because they knew when they were in school and when they were not. Whereas when it was online, it was much harder to organize time because they may have a class that ends at 10 o'clock and then another one that starts at 1. At school, that was 3 hours of study time or maybe 2 hours and lunch. At home, that's 3 hours at home. And organizing a day such that in a week's time there is study time set aside and kept set aside from week to week is much more difficult to do because it's harder to tell when work time stops and home time starts, especially when it's interwoven. So maybe talking a bit about the difficulties of time management in an online environment might be a useful thing.
I mean, that's not only for the students, that's for us as well. I mean,
yes.
I'm at home working, so home becomes a work environment. It's hard to go the other way, to put work down at the end of the day and say, I'm in home mode now.
Yeah.
Would that perhaps mean that we treat synchronous and asynchronous teaching time differently? I cannot see, if I'm in a Zoom synchronous moment, using that to do a worksheet or to help them analyze a lab. I would think that synchronous time needs to be a culminating discussion or a brainstorming at the beginning of a unit and the asynchronous can be a lot of what goes on in between. And I think that would solve some of the student focus issues, where they we're just doing a worksheet. I can multitask, that sort of thing.
What I had some trouble with last semester at the end with asynchronous was even students remembering to do the worksheet. They told me that without the presence of their classmates, it was easy to forget that they actually had anything to do. Hard to keep their mind on the fact that the school existed, because until they logged into the website, they were not thinking about school.
Then that gets us back to the culture question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's a hard one too.
How scheduled will students' time be in terms of synchronous meetings for most of your students? So I don't have a feel for my students at all how much of their time is actually going to be scheduled into synchronous classes or how much will be asynchronous. I have 3 classes I'm teaching that are lectures. I've got one that'll be synchronous, or one that'll be in person, one that's going to be asynchronous completely, and one I'm not sure what's going to happen to it. It will maybe be a mixture of those two. And so I don't really know in terms of the student's day how organized that is from the outside. So before, again, noting the time constraints, I'd also noticed that our student athletes, they tended to have a good advantage over the other students coming in terms of time management, because they knew they were going to be busy. And so they came in with the idea, I need to schedule things. Students who've not needed to do that before and now get this extra time, especially at the high school level, I would be very concerned about that.
Well, all of my students are going to be synchronous, both classrooms and labs. I decided that was best because for me, from the way I teach, interaction and helping each other is extremely important. I cannot put physics in their brains. They have to pull it in. I can just lay it out there. And when they work together, they're more willing to pull it in. And I found that the end of last semester, asynchronous did not work well. A lot of them, as some of my better students said, it was almost like the mindset of playing a video game. It wasn't like a video game, but they had the same attitude when they approached it.
I think last spring was tough because there were a lot of equity issues in terms of access to internet and things like that for students. So, I mean, I think a lot of schools, at least in the Phoenix area, kind of went to, your grade won't go down during fourth quarter kind of thing. So a lot of students, that got out. And so there were a lot of students who were kind of like, no, I'm happy with my grade. I don't really need to worry about those things. And it's going to be different as we go back, of course. I think at least at my school, we've already come up with the schedule. So students are attending their academic classes 2 mornings a week. They're attending their arts classes. I teach at a school for performing arts, a charter school. So they attend their arts classes, I think 2 afternoons a week as well. And then Fridays are kind of open for, working with students one-on-one, those kinds of things. But the other days, the days when they're not attending synchronous classes, they're expected to be like doing some work asynchronously for all their classes. So basically I'm planning 2 synchronous classes a week with each class and 2 asynchronous classes. And they're just trading off. So I have the ability to check in with them, but that's what made the most sense for us to go forward, at least until we can start back. Who knows when that's going to be.
If you do group work, one thing that can be useful for asynchronous, synchronous combined is to get a group started on a Google Doc that is shared among them. And so that they can all contribute to it as they all at the same time. I've heard that function of the Google programs can really keep people together, because every time a person adds something, it has their name on it. And if you've got a group of 3 working together and only 2 people add anything, it can be quite embarrassing for the third. And that peer pressure to not be embarrassed and to not be marked as someone who does nothing can be quite strong. For my students, it's in community college, it's what the students have described as what drives them to want to do well. And it seems like something like that might be a way to, without you being there, still make the question of don't embarrass yourself by doing absolutely nothing, because it will be shown. Everybody else working on the document will know that you did nothing.
So I want to make sure we hit some of the other questions that people submitted. And a lot of them, of course, come back to an ongoing thread from all of these meetings, which is working with labs at home. And I feel like we've talked a lot about some of the kinematics and mechanics type labs that students are doing at home. But there's been a couple questions for tonight specifically about E&M. And I'm curious if anyone has any ideas about labs or things that students can do at home to explore E&M properties.
One very excellent thing that I know of when introducing electric charge and electric force is the PhET, what is it called? It's a game, I believe it's electric field hockey.
Yeah.
And I find students respond very well to that. And if they can see each other's screens as they try to do it, they can actually get into some really intense conversation regarding how to change it, what to try, and get a very good concept of the significant difference between positive and negative charge, and how distance matters, especially if you challenge them to accomplish it with, say, less than 5 or 6 charges placed on the screen. I've had some students who will make if it's a positive charge and there's no restrictions, they'll just make a tube, shall we say, of negative charge that goes from the starting point to the goal, and then put one big negative charge to give it a kick, and it will just stay in that tube and go right in, and they'll consider that having mastered electric charge and Coulomb's law because it worked. But challenging them to do it with less than maybe 6 or 7 charges on the field, or see the fewest number of charges you can accomplish it with.
I mean, that's also it. I love that one because it's great for just internalizing the second law as well of inertia, in terms of things pick up the inertia and you have to change them. Also for the PhETs, the DC circuits, the circuit labs with PhETs are really good. I like those a lot. For magnetism, at least, smartphones have a magnetometer, so you can do things like figuring out where you are, like what your latitude is by looking at how do you orient this to make the magnitude of the magnetic field the greatest, and that's your direction, your local direction of magnetic field. You can even try to find where the magnet is in this if you have like another small disc magnet, not necessarily a fridge magnet, but any of the little disc magnets.
Fridge magnet doesn't work because
No,
it's
because it's
many alternating magnets. There's
yeah, someone mentioned in the chat the Physics Toolbox suite. Those are great. They just have great access to the sensors in the phone and have really nice outputs. And then you can actually like send yourself, text yourself, mail yourself a CSV file containing the data.
Firefox is not too bad, but and it's free. I don't know. Is Physics Toolbox free?
Yeah.
Could you put an email or tell me or something how to access it?
Just from
Never
any
looked at that one.
app store, like on either iPhone or.
And what is it called exactly?
Just Physics Toolbox.
Okay.
There's also a really, I think it's Physics Toolbox, but maybe it's another one from Rebecca Vieira, who you can use your cell phone to actually use the augmented reality feature of it to visualize magnetic field lines. And you can actually, move it around an object and it plots magnetic field vectors, I should say, not lines. It's very interesting.
I'm wondering about simulations. I have a 10th grade course and we're trying very much for inquiry, and the simulations sometimes seem to be, like opening a Christmas present that you asked for.
Yeah.
We know where we're going to end up, and we know that they can't get confused. They can't misalign wires. They can't do stuff. So we've been trying to put together a home lab where we're taking Christmas lights and cutting them apart. And the kid has to supply a couple batteries, and then the directions are to come up with, a series and parallel circuits. And but then we're running into the problems of doing measurements. And so E&M, we can wrap a compass with a current carrying wire. We can see that effect, but to do actual measurements, we're having a hard time being sure. And when we'd use the LED from the Christmas lights, they don't get dimmer and brighter with current flow. So, they're on or off. And great technology, but it's a new limit that I don't like. But,
yeah.
Any ideas?
Well, one that I saw that someone brought up in a previous coffee hour, which I thought was great. Maybe, I don't know for younger students, but it was, you can find them on Amazon, and they are little USB plugs that you plug into your USB drive that then has pinouts, so you can actually get the 2.5 volts or whatever USB voltage is as a constant voltage supply that gets around having to use batteries and things like that. I'm curious if you can short it, what that does to your USB port, but but it was. I'm sorry.
Let us know if you find out.
Yeah, I will let you. I will buy one and then see if I can short out my USB port, or I will use my office laptop. And Beth, you didn't hear me say that, so. To see if that works, but they were like $1 a piece. They were really inexpensive, and it might be another way around having to get batteries, and it gives you a nice constant voltage.
It's a good idea,
but it doesn't help with your measurement issue.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Yeah.
It doesn't address that. I was originally
exactly my problem.
Yeah, I was originally going to say that in some of these smartphone sensors, they give you access to the light meter, and you can actually use the light meter for the LEDs. But as you just said, those don't actually dim and flow; they're just on and off. So that blew that idea.
Flashlight battery goes on and off. If it's, well, no, I guess a lot of them today are just multiple LEDs, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the standard tools are not standard anymore. As I understand it, there are some students don't have wire at home.
Yeah, that's where we were using the Christmas lights cut apart.
So do you teach them about magnetic fields around wires and then use the magnetic field sensor in the phone to measure current in the wire?
I haven't done that yet, no, but that's one of the things we're working towards.
I don't know if a Christmas light would have enough current to register on a phone. And of course, it'd be such an indirect measurement that you really couldn't use Ohm's law or something for it, right? You would just simply be able to give a qualitative description.
There's some good magnetic field simulations, but I don't know of any really good at-home measurement lab.
Yeah.
Where you're actually changing something and seeing the change. You could do it with a coil of wire, but you'd need a lot of wire to make a big enough coil, a strong enough coil.
And a pretty good current.
Yeah.
In terms of materials, how do you envision this being stuff that students can buy? Or are you envisioning them picking these things up at school and taking them home? Are you putting them into kits and sending them? What are you thinking in terms of equipment and accessibility that way?
Right now, we're in a hybrid, so we'd have them 2 days a week. But E&M comes later, like November. And so we're trying to think of what we would do if we went into a distance mode. We can't possibly send enough lab kits home to do one at each home or, anything like that. So that at $5 a student, it gets out of hand right away. And we're having a hard time with that. That's why I'm saying they would buy the battery. And with a flashlight bulb, you have to have some kind of holder for it, and creating that, because they can't solder. I may be stuck with simulations even if I don't think they're perfect, but I was just wondering if people had ideas.
Well, to make a small plug, over the summer, AAPT started its Summer Grand Challenge of school supply physics, where we are trying to collect these exact type of things, lab ideas that students can do at home, and specifically not simulations, because PhET is great and PhET doesn't need a lot of help in publicizing itself. But a lot of the things that you can do with your students or students can do by themselves at home using very basic things. And we're trying to build a library of these. In fact, we started a small competition that we're calling the Summer Grand Challenge, which actually concludes this Friday. And then we will very quickly turn that around and publish a PDF, as well as kind of a materials list that you can kind of quickly run through and see what things you might need and what things you could ask your students to buy, like batteries or string or USB plugs for the computer for constant voltage. But the idea is that we turn it around fast enough that people can think about ways of getting this out to the students, or even including this as something that you would like your students to purchase, given some upper limit to how much money you can spend, whether it's $5 or $10 or something like that per student. So if you have great ideas, please submit them. You still have until Friday. But if you're looking for ideas, hopefully we will turn that around in the next maybe even week, 10 days, 14 days. We really want to make it fast so people can get access to it during the summer so they can still use the plan. So,
Mark?
Edwin, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, man with the beard. Hey, Mark, group, I'm a chemist by training. Physics has been the bane of my life trying to teach it. UNESCO, I've worked with the United Nations trying to solve the same problem, doing at-home activities in very impoverished situations where you have no access to much of anything. And UNESCO has an incredible amount of activities designed for working with students in the back corners of the world. And it's quite lots and lots of activity, especially in chemistry, which is my Forte, we've got manuals and books filled with just about every chemical concept you can do with lemon juice and do a titration with a couple of martinis, that sort of thing. And so I need to check. I was just starting to look online talking about UNESCO and physics, and that might be a source that you'd want to look at. They've got lots of curriculum materials that were designed for this kind, distance thing, but it was for in poverty situations where kids didn't have much money. That was the reason it wasn't a COVID disease. And that might be a good source for what you're looking for. It came from a different direction, but it was still trying to solve the same problem. How do we teach physics at home with no money or little money? I decided to throw that in the mix.
I have to go, but I was going to mention that somebody in one of the workshops for the AAPT last week pointed out that there's a organization in San Jose, Raft, and when I looked at some of their stuff, it's really interesting. So like instead of a circuit board, they had styrofoam, well not styrofoam, but the black sort of foam, and you could stick in binder sort of things for the wires, so you didn't have to really do a breadboard, which they might have at home. So I'm just sort of encouraging. I mean, we're in a different situation. We have money to send out some kits, but that looked really promising to me. And I gotta go. So goodbye, everyone. This was very helpful.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, actually, I've heard of Raft as well, although I don't remember where, but it is, I think it's been around a bit. It's not a new resource, and I'm glad that Ronnie put the link in the chat, so you can go check it out yourself.
But, so Edwin, you're talking about the circuit stuff and trying to use a light bulb to kind of, I guess, show the different currents and the different brightnesses. Was that kind of what you were trying to do? That
was one of the places to go with it, yes.
One, and this would have to be brainstormed a little bit, but rather than using brightness, if you use heat and like have some sort of easy to find resistive element and put have students like create little slivers of candle wax and see like how much the wax melts for a certain amount of time, something like that, to get away from, it's a similar concept of the resistive element emitting power.
Right.
Great source of wax, that would just be birthday candles.
Yeah.
No, that's a great idea. I'm writing it down.
If it works, let me know how it goes, because I was just brainstorming that now. So
I'll send it to the August competition.
In fact, I might be getting this wrong, but I think they used the whole melting wax thing in the initial study of thermal conductivity and the distribution of heat. They just basically saw at what point the wax stopped melting along, like the traditional setup of you have the metal rod between two heat baths and it forms that nice equilibrium temperature. I could be mistaken, but I think I remember seeing that was how those experiments way back when were originally done.
Interesting idea. Okay.
So one other question that has been another theme throughout all these meetings, and I always ask people this because I think it's a good one, is and it kind of wraps up a lot of the things we've talked about tonight, which is we think about way to look at assignments and assessments, whether they are lab activities or self-practice or even tests of some kind, is how are we approaching, or are we considering the idea of making all these more social interactions between students, and thinking about this as a group activity where students can learn from each other rather than kind of an isolated activity that students are doing in your classroom. And I guess along with this question comes the idea of I think there's two ways of worrying about academic integrity when it comes to assessments, which is we can try to lock everything down, or we can just embrace it and say, okay, the world is your oyster.
For me, what I'm doing is making my homework problems 3 parts. The first part is an introductory paragraph. The second part is the actual solving of it. And then the third part is a concluding paragraph to describe, the introductory would describe the problem in words, what they're looking for, what applies to it. The last part would be more to evaluate the results and whether it maybe states something realistic that would represent that magnitude of a quantity, link it to reality and link it to the original problem. So really about 2/3 of it would be writing instead of math, which is much more difficult to fake. And I know Chegg has most of the math problems, so they can get that part easily, but it does not have the paragraphs.
Yeah.
To understand it, Chegg's got just about the mathematics of just about every problem you could imagine. Except some of the tipper style problems it doesn't focus on.
Well, I bring this up, once again, as a concluding comment for the evening, is to bring it back to this idea of community building, and to think about, can we use our assessments as a way to build and foster community, and rather than have isolating students to do their work on their own, but rather kind of use that as a rallying point to get students to work together and to talk and to communicate and to get to a conclusion in a more mutual way.
One thing I did last semester that I think I'm going to do this semester too, that a lot of students liked, was in Google Meet. It was convenient because the college provides every student with a complete Google account. So how they get their email address for the college. I created a Google Meet. How did I call it? Google Physics Hangout, I believe I referred to it as, labeled it. In the LMS system, just made it a link in the course menu. And it was always open. Students, that's something that's nice about Google versus Zoom. Google Meet is always open. And they could go to it in groups as they pleased and talk to each other there. And quite a few did use it. Contact each other in some other way, because when they were in it, they could show their work to each other. Presentation is a quality of every person automatically in the Google Meet program. I'd say more than half the students used it as groups.
Well, I think, like I said, to bring this all back together to how do we start the school year off? I think in our syllabus, in our community building, and all the things we're talking about tonight, oftentimes where the rubber meets the road for students is how we assess them and how we give them grades, right? Whether they the overemphasis on the grade. But I think that all comes back to how we start the year off and how we build the community that we want them to build. And whether that is more explicit statements in syllabi, or whether that is how we define online interactions between students, all of these things I think come back to that starting point that we started the conversation off with. And I thought it was good to kind of come back to that as we reach the end of our hour of conversation. So once again, I'm always very excited to see everyone. I feel like I've come to know people through these coffee hours. It's wonderful. I have friends all over the country now. I hope to come visit you someday. But it is wonderful to see everybody, and I hope you continue to come, and I hope you continue to find these coffee hours useful and helpful. So with that, I think we should sign off and see you all next week.
Thank you, Mark, for all you do, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.